On today's show, the Houston Rockets can add one more significant contributor to their roster ahead of this upcoming season. What are the biggest needs from this final edition? Is it shooting, defense, more ball handling? We'll get into all of it on today's Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform you're choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. We got a lot to get into on today's episode. The Rockets have enough room salary cap wise, and they got to fill that final roster spot after waiving Nate Williams. So we're going to be taking a look at some of the names, some of the available free agents still out there, and kind of addressing what are the biggest needs out of that final spot. Can the Rockets address all three of these needs, be it shooting, defense, and ball handling, with one player in that final and 14th spot? We're going to get into a bunch of different names on today's show. First, I want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. All right, so I want to set the stage here momentarily. We mentioned it in our episode last week, very briefly, that the Rockets they chose to waive Nate Williams. And what that has effectively done is now the Rockets have 13 players signed to their 15-man roster. That is one below the minimum number of players. An NBA team has to have at minimum 14 players on their roster. They don't have to have the 15th player signed, even though you can have up to 15. And they're allowed to dip below 14 during the offseason, just like you're actually allowed to go up to like 20 players signed during the offseason. You're allowed to dip below that 14th number for stretches during the regular season, but for only up to 2 weeks at a time and for a total of 28 days during the regular season. So the Rockets more than likely will have to have somebody signed to that 14th roster spot ahead of the start of the NBA season. Sometimes teams can get away with like juggling, like a two-way guy, or like juggling 10-day contracts and just, recycling them and bringing in more fresh 10-day contracts over and over. But at the end of the day, the Rockets do have enough money left over after waiving Nate Williams. They have about $3.5 million of salary cap space up to that first apron hard cap. So about $3.5 million that they can spend to go get themselves one more free agent, one more piece of the puzzle, one more addition to an already incredibly deep roster. And I think that myself and many others are looking at this team and thinking, man, it would be great if they could add just one more like insurance policy kind of guard, because the guard depth on this team is not great, right? It's Fred VanVleet. It's a lot of pressure on year 2 Reed Shepherd, and then it's Aaron Holiday. And that's what you've got. Those are your only 3 guards, and they all happen to be relatively undersized, like point guards. They're not even combo guards. Like you don't have a legitimate, 2 guard anywhere on the roster. It's those 3 guards and then a billion wings and forwards, and then your triple bigs of Sengun, Adams, and Capela. So with that kind of setting the stage there are still a number of free agents out there that would kind of fit that bill and be able to be brought in as essentially, kind of a third string point guard, kind of holding down the fort with Aaron Holiday as part of that stay ready crew, in the sense that, the Rockets are still very committed to the idea of, Reed Shepherd and his role on this team this next season. Summer League didn't change anything about that. For better or for worse, fans, ride the emotional highs of, oh my God, or, oh, this is great. But, the Rockets are still committed to giving Reed Shepherd the opportunity to show that he is ready or not ready for this role this upcoming season. That being said, it would probably be best case scenario to have that third string guard in place other than Aaron Holiday, that is, on the off chance that, let's say, Reed Sheppard is ready and he's good to go and he's looks awesome as the backup guard. Maybe there's a stretch of games where Fred VanVleet misses some time and you need, a replacement for him suddenly. Or maybe Reed Sheppard misses a little bit of time, or maybe Amen Thompson has to miss some games. Like it doesn't hurt to have that one more depth piece in there, especially at what is arguably the weakest position on the floor right now for the Rockets, which is that kind of point guard slot, that combo guard slot, really just guard in general is kind of the weakest position for this Rockets team after all their subsequent moves this offseason. So with all of that in mind, and then looking at, I guess, the skills that we laid out, we talked about this in a previous episode as well, but when we were looking at the Rockets free agency options before they settled on Dorian Finney-Smith, of these three skills, be it shooting, defense, and ball handling, what would be the most important skills that you could add with this final signing? Is there a possibility to add somebody who can do a little bit of all three of these things? At this stage in free agency, probably a little hard to be able to grab a guy that can shoot, defend, and handle the rock a little bit at this stage. But if you could get a guy who could do two out of these three things with consistency, that has a proven track record as a shooter or as a defender or as a ball handler, or a little bit, again, of all three or both of those skills, or two out of those three skills, that would be, I think, a total win for the Rockets at this stage in free agency, so late in the free agency period. So with that, I've got a list of names here kind of compiled, and we'll talk about each one, what kind of these options represent, going over some of their stats from, their career, their previous seasons, all that stuff. And the first name, and this is the name that seems the most painfully obvious, and I feel like it's so painfully obvious that it's not going to happen because it's that obvious. The first name that I have on this list is Malcolm Brogdon. Reason being, right, he has history with head coach Ime Udoka. The Celtics went and traded for Malcolm Brogdon during their first finals run with Ime as their head coach. He's got an existing relationship there. He does fit the bill as kind of a combo guard. He clocks in at about 6'4", so you can play him on ball as a primary ball handler. You can play him off ball on the wings. He's a knockdown 3-point shooter. Career 39%, 38.8% from behind the 3-point line. Has had a rough past couple years with being jettisoned to Portland for Drew Holiday and then getting shuffled over to Washington after that. So hasn't really been relevant, the past couple of years, but when healthy, when motivated, when playing, Malcolm Brogdon's a really solid guy. The biggest knock on Malcolm Brogdon has been throughout his entire career, realistically, has been the injury concerns. But if the Rockets aren't bringing him in to play, a substantial role, if they're bringing him in as more of an insurance policy, third string guy, to have either in case Reed Sheppard doesn't work out or in case there's a major injury and somebody has to miss some significant time elsewhere in the rotation, I think the Rockets could do a lot worse than Malcolm Brogdon for the money that they have and for the skills that he brings. He's certainly a knockdown 3-point shooter. He's certainly a guy that you can let handle the offense for a little bit. He can be a primary ball handler, situationally, and again, played on ball or off ball at the point guard spot or at the 2 guard. And then the last question, though, is defensively, Brogdon, he's 32 now. He is getting a little bit older. And, I really, as far as how he would be able to hold up defensively, there might be some questions on that side of the basketball at this stage of his career. But at least with the other two skills, the shooting, the ball handling, you'd be set there. And the way this Rockets roster is constructed, you'd have so many phenomenal defenders surrounding him pretty much at all times that I don't think the defense would necessarily be that much of an issue, if at all. So Brogdon seems like, to me, a very clear option for the Rockets to consider for that final 14th roster spot. Could be had for very cheap. He's currently an unrestricted free agent. No issues there. That's name number 1 on our list. Coming up, we'll get into a bunch of the other names that I have slotted here for us to talk about, but I'm also curious your thoughts. What is the Rockets' biggest need with this final spot? Is it the shooting, or is it more shooting? Is it the ball handling? Is it the defense? What would you like to see the Rockets do with this final roster spot? I want your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Give me some of your names in the YouTube comments. Coming up, we'll continue going down the list of names that I have sorted out for us here. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? Well, with Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building your wealth. Look, when I started using Monarch, I'll admit I was a little frustrated and kind of disappointed with myself about how much money I was spending on food. I'm talking like just dining out at restaurants, getting fast food, ordering carry out, using delivery apps. Like it was obscene, honestly. Now I budget smarter and I save more. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your very first year. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Thanks for making LOR your first listen each and every single day as we navigate through this point of the offseason. All right, let's get to our next name on this list for the Houston Rockets. And another name that I saw, in passing, saw some other Rockets fans talking about him as a possibility, Alec Burks. Now, Burks would give the Rockets a legitimate two-guard threat off the bench. And Alec Burks has at times in his NBA career been a bit of a Rockets killer. Burks has certainly lit up the Rockets on more than one occasion throughout his career. Bit of a journeyman. He's bounced around a little bit. He's been with a bunch of different teams, coming off a season with the Miami Heat. He also played for the Knicks right before that. He is a career 38.5% three-point shooter. So another knockdown, outside three-point shooter. He is, I think, the oldest name that I have here on this list at 34 years of age, just turned 34 on July 20th. And shooting is probably his predominant skill here, right? Alec Burks is not a guy that you want running the show. He's not a guy you want initiating offense for other guys. He's not a guy that you want walking the ball up. I'm guessing he could do it in a pinch, but he's definitely not a guy that you want initiating the offense consistently with regularity. And then defensively, at 34 years old, Burks has been a solid defender throughout his career, but never really like a hardcore plus level defender. And at this stage, again, when you get a little bit older there, it's going to be a little bit harder to be able to put forth, your best defensive effort. You might be a little bit limited at times on the defensive side of the ball. And so with Burks, he goes from being a guy that maybe brings you 2 out of those 3 skills, or again, ideally all 3 of those skills would be available. And I think we've got one name on this whole list that actually provides all 3 skills, and we'll get to him in just a moment. But Burks gives you at least another knockdown shooter. He gives you a guy that you can slot in at the 2-guard spot. And as long as you've got, a legitimate ball handler, playmaker alongside him, be it one of Fred VanVleet or Amin Thompson, or if Reed Shepherd does work out, right, then you can, play Reed Shepherd out there a little bit alongside Burks. Gives the Rockets a little bit of a, scoring pop potentially off the bench. Maybe some nights they lean more into the defensive side of things with Dorian Finney-Smith. Maybe other nights they want to go a little bit more offensive focused, and that's where you could go with a guy like Alec Burks. So an interesting name for sure. One that I think warrants at least a little bit of consideration from the Rockets front office, although not one of my overall favorites for what the Rockets truly need out of this final spot. And, maybe not necessarily, at this stage, an Ime Udoka guy. At the end of the day, we know that defense comes first for Ime pretty much across the board. And I would find it, I'd find it very difficult to believe that the Rockets would go acquire a free agent that isn't at least a solid to plus level defender out of this final spot. Even if this player isn't going to get consistent rotation minutes, even if this player is going to be like an insurance policy kind of player, defense is such a sticking point for Ime Udoka that if you're not at least solid as a defender, it's going to be really hard to envision, Ime wanting to play you, I guess, at this stage. So, which might as well, I should have probably gone on that spiel after this next name that I had on the list. But the next name that I had teed up, Seth Curry. And Seth Curry is easily the best shooter of the 5 or 6 names that I have drawn up here. Coming off his most recent season in Charlotte, 45.5% from downtown. Granted, it wasn't on great volume, just 2.7 3-point attempts per game, but he's a career 43.3% 3-point shooter, right? The dude can absolutely light it up from distance, just like his brother. And so actually, I take it back. Alec Burks is not the oldest guy on this list. I thought it would be Burks. It's actually Seth Curry, 34 years old. He'll be 35 by the start of the NBA season. So with Seth Curry, I think that you're looking at another situation similar to Alec Burks. I think Seth Curry is a little bit more of a capable ball handler at times than Alec Burks would be. So I think you address maybe more so 2 of those 3 needs, even if the ball handling isn't phenomenal or isn't as good as some of the other players on this list. I do think that the shooting is far and away the best. He is the best available free agent shooter right now, probably on the market. And for a Rockets team that certainly struggled with shooting the 3 ball last year and is bound to command so many double teams with the offensive threat and gravity of guys like Kevin Durant and Alperen Sengun next season, it would really behoove the Rockets to have a couple guys that are reliable, like sharp shooting, knockdown 3-point guys, right? Not guys that are like, high volume, hovering around 36, 37%. Like I'm talking like some dead eye snipers, right? DFS fits that mold. He shot over 40% last year. Seth Curry would certainly fit that mold. Shooting, 43% for his career. You put a lineup of Seth Curry, DFS out there with Kevin Durant and Alperen Sengun, and then pick your poison for that final spot. Could be Jabari Smith Jr., could be Tari Eason, could be Amin Thompson if you want more of a legitimate ball handler out there, or want to keep your defensive presence still out there with Amin Thompson's defensive capabilities. There's a lot of lineup versatility there, but imagine trying to double team KD or double teaming Sengun and then be able to kick the ball out to a guy who's a knockdown 43% shooter or a knockdown 40% plus 3-point shooter. That'd be a whole hell of a lot better than what we saw last season with the Rockets kicking it out to guys who were shooting below league average for most of the year from long distance. But a lot of the same holdups with Seth Curry here as what I said for Alec Burks. Defensively leaves a lot to be desired. In fact, Burks is a better defender than Seth Curry has ever been in his career. Seth is, he's smaller. He has, a tendency to be able to get abused or taken advantage of on the defensive side of the ball. He's not a guy that you really want being deployed in a switch everything scheme or in a scheme where you at least switch things 1 through 4. In fact, he's a guy that you oftentimes have to hide defensively and kind of come up with defensive protections for. And is that really the kind of guy that you want to bring in as your insurance policy 3rd string point guard or situational, spark plug shooter off the bench? Maybe not. Maybe, the shooting outweighs some of those concerns, especially if, he only plays, 5 to 10 minutes a night in certain situational matchups or when they really need some outside shooting, or if Fred misses some time, then, he becomes the backup point guard instead of the 3rd string guard. Who knows? But Seth Curry, for a lot of the same reasons as Alec Burks, I think would maybe struggle at times to crack. Let me rephrase. I don't think any of these names are truly going to crack the rotation for Ime. I think the rotation is likely pretty set. The idea here, though, is that if Reed Sheppard falls out of the rotation, could one of these names be a better overall fit and a more impactful piece than, say, Aaron Holiday sliding in for Reed Sheppard in place of him in the rotation, similar to what happened last season? And I do think from that perspective, Seth Curry, better option than Aaron Holiday. Alec Burks, maybe about the same tier as Aaron Holiday. Maybe slightly better. He gives you more size, a little bit of an ability to switch better, 1 through 4, things like that. Malcolm Brogdon, I think, would be better than Aaron Holiday, but that's in the vacuum of he's not getting injured. So the injury concerns are very real with Malcolm Brogdon. But I do have 3 more names here that I want to get to in our final segment, as well as sharing my thoughts on who I think the best name on the list is for the Rockets to pursue. We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, final 3 names here. First one on the docket, I've got Payne, who just came off a solid season with the New York Knicks, although with the Knicks adding Jordan Clarkson, it seems like they're maybe not looking at bringing Payne back. Payne is a very serviceable backup point guard. He's not quite as reliable of an outside shot as some of the other guys on this list. He's a career 36.8% from downtown. He certainly had some years where the numbers have dipped a little lower. He's had some years where they've gone a little bit higher. But overall, you get a steady, reliable three-point shooter, not a knockdown three-point shooter, but a steady, reliable outside presence. You get a guy who can run the offense, who can ball handle. He's probably I'd say the second best ball handler on this entire list, behind probably Malcolm Brogdon. And even then, it might be a toss-up between Malcolm Brogdon and Cameron Payne. Hey, look, they lost one Cam, bring in another Cam. But I think Payne would be a very serviceable kind of third string guard. Now, the question with Payne and some of these other names on this list, right, is would these guys be willing to accept that kind of a role? Would they be able to accept a role where essentially you're not guaranteed any minutes whatsoever? And the only chance that you do have at potentially getting minutes is if the 2 guys in front of you, if one of them either gets hurt or if one of them just doesn't pan out and can't meet expectations, right? That being, a Fred VanVleet injury or Reed Shepherd just flat out not panning out, or I guess a Reed injury, but we don't want injuries at all. That's worst case scenario. It takes a certain kind of player to be able to accept not having a role on a basketball team. And with where the Rockets are, though, with how they're positioned in the Western Conference, with this arms race of the Rockets and the Nuggets, and now the Clippers with adding Beal and Chris Paul, my goodness, we'll have to talk about Chris Paul and James Harden reuniting in a future episode because that's something else. But with all these teams chasing the OKC Thunder and trying to put themselves in title contention, right? Making these kind of not quite all-in moves, but championship, caliber type moves to make themselves championship contenders. There's got to be some names out there that are looking at the Rockets and thinking, yeah, I could go play for the Rockets and not have a role and try to win a title with them. And, or I play a very reduced role and I'm there for veteran leadership, or I'm there as an insurance policy. There are certainly guys that would be accepting of a role like that. Some probably more so than others. I think Payne still has enough left in the tank, though. At only 30 years old, he'll be 31 when the season starts, that he probably wants a legitimate spot in somebody's rotation somewhere. And he's more than good enough to have a legitimate spot in somebody's rotation as a backup guard. So I certainly think that he gives you, a capable shooter, a capable ball handler, a capable defender. I think he's more or less, I think I don't want to say the most well-rounded of all these guys, with as far as all 3 of those skills are concerned. Just kind of solid across the board, not anything to super write home about, but would be a great third string guard to bring in if Reed Shepherd didn't work out, or again, injury concerns with Fred. Next name on this list, and this is easily the best defender on the list, and Rockets fans should be intimately familiar with this name, Gary Payton II. And GP2, the Rockets, look, one thing about the construction of this Rockets roster is their best point of attack defender is Amin Thompson. Their second best point of attack defender is Fred VanVleet. Their third best point of attack defender is Dorian Finney-Smith. And, DFS, similar to Dillon Brooks, although I do think is slightly more equipped than Dillon Brooks to deal with perimeter players, is still going to struggle at times guarding smaller, quicker, faster guys. That's where Amin Thompson and Fred VanVleet have to really hold down the fort, chasing those smaller, quicker, more explosive guards around the perimeter. And I'll tell you what, that's not exactly something you really want Fred VanVleet doing a ton of either, but he's the Rockets' second best option as a point of attack defensive presence, right? There's a lot of pressure on Ime Thompson, and there's going to be some games where Ime Thompson has to guard the bigger, more capable wing level threat, guys like Luka Doncic or LeBron or whatever. And when he's guarding one of those guys, who's left to guard the smaller, quicker, faster player? Well, that's going to be Fred VanVleet's job. So the Rockets could, I think, very, very much so use one more very solid point of attack defender, a perimeter-oriented defender, a guy who can clamp down on guards. And we saw just how frustrating GP2 made life for Jalen Green and situationally Fred VanVleet in that playoff series against the Warriors. Now, GP2 is not a primary ball handler, and he's certainly not a shooter. So he's not giving you 2 out of the 3 skill sets here that you'd like out of this final spot. But he is giving you by far the best defense on this list. And if you could get him on a vet minimum deal and have him be your situational, you deploy him some games when you really need to slow down, like an all-star guard on the other team, and he can go, 5, 6, 7 games in a row getting DNPs before he gets his number called. And then suddenly the Rockets could put out like an absurd defensive lineup of like GP2, Ime Thompson, Dorian Finney-Smith, Kevin Durant, and Jabari Smith Jr. or something crazy like that, where you've got 2 elite point of attack defenders, you've got 3 elite wing defenders, you've got length, you've got size, you've got rebounding. Like that would be the real version of the Rockets' death lineup at that point. I think that sounds really appealing, and knowing Ime Udoka's tendency to gravitate towards defensive-minded players, I could see the Rockets maybe kicking the tires on a GP2 offer. Maybe he doesn't want to leave Golden State. Maybe the Warriors are still, figuring things out financially before they decide to, resign him. I haven't seen anything that said that the Warriors intend to bring back GP2. And I also apologize for any of the other names on this list. Like, I haven't seen any reports of like, oh, so-and-so plans to sign this guy, and they're just delaying because of other salary cap implications. So if I missed one of those on one of these names, I do apologize. But GP2 presents a very intriguing option there for that final roster spot. Kind of a defensive specialist, I guess, that the Rockets could deploy as needed. And I certainly think he gives them, he would immediately become the Rockets' second best point of attack defender on the roster behind Ime Thompson, and give them a guy that they could pivot to if they really needed, and you could run double small with Fred and GP2 out there and Ime Thompson at the 3 for certain lineups, and have GP2 and Ime be your 2 best defenders and still have Fred out there to set the table and do things offensively. Lineup spacing becomes a bit of an issue then, because you have to kind of play GP2, out of the dunker spot, or if you play him in the corner, then, defenses are going to sag off of him. They're going to dare him to hit shots from the outside, which he's capable of doing, just not at a super proficient clip. He's a career 34% 3-point shooter. So all things to keep in mind with GP2. And the last name that I have here on the list, and this is the one, honestly, that I feel the most strongly about, because this is a very high risk, incredibly high reward play, I feel like, if you're the Houston Rockets. And I think that this is the type of name that you can go after when you're talking about a third string insurance policy type guy. This is the type of name that they could go after, similar to what they did going after Steven Adams and trading for him. He was a non-factor for the half season that they had him while he was rehabbing, and then they slowly built him up and brought him along this season, and he became one of their most impactful players by year's end and into the playoffs, right? De'Anthony Melton. It's time to bring him home, right? Rockets former pick that never got a chance to actually suit up for Houston. De'Anthony Melton would be, I think, a fantastic addition to this Rockets team. I will start with the caveat, right? He's had injury issues the past 2 seasons in a row. And so for De'Anthony Melton, I don't even know right now if he's on track to be ready for the start of the NBA season. But, I remember being upset when the Warriors traded for Melton this past season, thinking, oh my God, Golden State got De'Anthony Melton. Good God. He's going to be fantastic for them. Great point of attack defender, incredibly long arms, great defensive presence overall. And then offensively, a serviceable ball handler. Not really a guy that you want as your primary ball handler, but can be a decent enough secondary ball handler, over the course of a game. And then as a shooter from the perimeter, he's a career 36.9% 3-point shooter. Nice. I think that he would give the Rockets the best bang for their buck out of that final spot. He certainly fits the mold of an Ime Udoka type player. Defense first, easily his best skill when he's healthy and available on the court. Still a reliable shooter from the perimeter. And he's had some seasons where he's gone 39% one year. He went 41% one year. He's had a couple really solid seasons. These past two, though, 37% this last year, 36% the year before that. Every year it's been on really good volume, either 4 attempts per game or more. Most years it's about 5.5 attempts per game. So there's volume there to consider. And my favorite part, though, he's young. He's 26 years old. He'll be, pardon me. I apologize. He's 27 now. He was 26 this past season. So he'll be, a little over, I don't know, about 27 and a half right when the season starts. So he's not one of these, over the hill, 30 plus, 32, 34-year-old veterans, who, are kind of in the twilight of their careers. This is a guy that is still, I think, has a lot to give to an NBA franchise, to an organization somewhere. He just needs to see if he can get past, the injury issues that has been dealing with these past couple of years. And, it's really hard for a team to take a chance on a guy like this if they need to be able to rely on him in a sizable role. But for the Rockets, one, they've still got Aaron Holiday waiting in the wings, right? So, God forbid if they did need to pivot to somebody and Melton was somehow injured again or just not ready to go at the start of the season, they've still got Aaron Holiday that they can pivot to. But I think De'Anthony Melton gives the Rockets a more souped up version of Aaron Holiday, a considerably better defender than Aaron Holiday, got better length, a little bit better size, better defensive instincts than Aaron Holiday. Not quite the sharpshooter that Holiday is, but I really like the idea of them going after De'Anthony Melton. And I really think that this could be an opportunity for the Rockets to have another situation similar to the Steven Adams experience where they slow played, getting him into the rotation potentially, or maybe not even at all, right? Assuming if knock on wood that Reed Sheppard pans out. But allowing him to rehab, allowing him to get to a place where he's, his body is back to 100% or at least close to 100% to where he feels like he can be a contributor. And so I like the idea of a I called it high risk, high reward, but I think it's actually low risk, high reward for the Rockets, because the risk is simply you sign Melton, you give him, a 1-year contract. He gets a chance, on a prove it deal to showcase that he's still got something in the tank. Hell, maybe if you feel really confident about him, if you bring him in, do a physical, that kind of thing, depending on where he's at, with his rehab and his injury progression. Maybe you bring him on a 2-year contract and you just tell him, you know what, take all the time you need this year. We'll be ready to call your number, in February or March or next season, whatever. But for a 26-year-old guard who can defend at a very, very high level, who can reliably knock down shots from the perimeter and be a ball handler in a pinch, that's the kind of guy that could be a potential long-term backup point guard solution. Let's pretend for a second that Reed Sheppard does pan out, right? Imagine Reed Sheppard down the line eventually taking over for Fred VanVleet and then being able to have De'Anthony Melton as Reed Sheppard's consistent backup, assuming he's able to get his career kind of back on track from the injuries that he's been dealing with. I like the De'Anthony Melton name. I think he's my favorite name on this whole list. But I'm curious, which name stood out the most to you? Do you have a name that wasn't included on my list that you'd like to see the Rockets go after? Maybe it's not a guard at all. Maybe you want one more wing player added. Maybe you want another big man out there. Maybe you want a stretch 5 added to the roster. Who knows? Give me your thoughts in the YouTube comments. That's going to do it for today's show. Remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform you're choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.